Take a look around you right now. Look around the room. Your family, your friends, the people you trust. 1 in 4 girls you know will be a victim of child sex abuse before the age of 18.
Highest incidence, particularly of child sexual abuse, that happens with children is usually child on child. 93 to 94%, the perpetrators are known to the family and child.
Wow. How do I tell my little girl?
It's not a one and done thing, and it's not stranger danger. There isn't one time where I walk off that stage and somebody hasn't walked up to me or to tell me their story of how they were a victim of child abuse. That's well-to-do families, from lower socioeconomic families. There's no boundary around this thing.
Most people think child abuse happens somewhere else and not in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
What do you think would shock people the most right now about what's happening here in San Antonio?
As far as confirmations go, in large urban areas, we're number one, unfortunately, in confirmed victims of child abuse.
And that has been the case for how long?
Since I've been at ChildSafe for the past 15 years at least.
What kinds of abuse would you say are most common that people don't even realize exist?
The largest confirmation number is going to be a neglect. After that, you get, every year, you kind of get this volleying back and forth of confirmations between physical abuse and sexual abuse. For the past probably 3 or 4 years, the sexual abuse confirmation rate in Bexar County has been higher than the physical abuse confirmation rate. The reason why sexual abuse was so much higher for a number of years is because during the COVID pandemic, you had a lot of children who were left at home with sexual predators, unfortunately. And it takes roughly 2 to 3 years for a child of child sexual abuse to come forward and make an outcry of their story.
Is it true that in most abuse cases, the child knows the person that's harming them?
93 to 94% of individuals who are being confirmed victims of child abuse, the perpetrators are known to the family and child. Usually a caregiver, a sibling, a step-sibling, a step-parent, but it could be an uncle, could be a secondary relative, but you also see individuals in the community. You'll see teachers, you'll see mentors, you'll see people of the church, unfortunately. It just runs the entire gambit.
So based on the conversations you've heard from children over the years, what would shock parents the most right now?
The length of time in which the abuse has happened, particularly when it comes to child sexual abuse. It's not a one and done thing, and it's not stranger danger. And this has been something that has been going on sometimes for multiple years before the child is brave enough to come forward or before the child even realizes that what was happening to them was wrong. That's a direct result of the grooming process. If my job as a perpetrator of child physical abuse or sexual abuse is to build trust within the family. Once I build trust with you as a caregiver, that allows me to separate you, the child, from the caregiver. And I get to spend more time alone with that child, and that's where the grooming process happens. I've earned your trust, now I can separate you, and now I can perpetrate my crime against the child.
And that makes sense because the child is left alone with that person, and that person has access to the child more than anybody else.
And the child, not only has they groomed the caregiver, but they groomed the child, right? Because I'm your buddy, I'm your friend. And now when I do these things to you, I do these things to you in secret, and it becomes our secret. And now the perpetration of that abuse can continue on and on and on and on until the child makes an outcry or somebody intervenes and notices that it's happening and comes forward.
This is a personal question. I'm a mother of a 4-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there is young enough to begin this conversation.
There isn't. The earlier you can have the conversation, the better.
How do you do it, though? Like, I often think about this. How do I tell my little girl to watch out?
It's a great question because everybody's child is a little bit different, and everybody has a different type of relationship with their own child. I'd love to tell you that everybody's super ultra connected to their children, and some of us who are even ultra connected to their children, to your point, the child doesn't want to have that conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation with the child. But I always think that honesty in these situations is what's most important. What's the worst thing that can happen if you open the door to that conversation with your child? They're not going to want to have it. But if you continue to have that conversation in an age-appropriate way, nothing bad can happen, only something good can happen.
But how direct, how honest are you talking?
Extremely honest and extremely direct. We encourage people not to call anatomical body parts by cute names. Call them what they are. Call a vagina, a penis, so that there's clarity and there's understanding in what it is that is going on, so that when they make their outcry, there's no confusion about what is happening to them, that they understand that when they make that outcry, this is where I'm being touched. This is what's happening to me.
Why do you think Bexar County has such a high rate of child abuse?
A lot of people just don't really understand the prevalence of child abuse in Bexar County and San Antonio in general. When you look at the per capita number of children who are being abused in our community, even though Houston has a much larger, denser population of children, it's the prevalence in which it's happening. Generally, what you're looking at are risk factors when it comes to child abuse. Things such as the poverty rate, like what is the level of poverty that we have in San Antonio, which is really, really high. Things such as substance abuse. We have a high rate of substance abuse inside of Bexar County. We have a high rate of young youth who are parents who aren't ready to be parents. We have a high pregnancy rate for underage parents. We have a high rate of domestic violence inside of our community as well. When you put all these different things together, it increases stressors onto the family unit, and that ultimately results in higher rates and confirmation of child abuse.
What are predators looking for when they target a child?
I think the big thing that they're looking for is they're looking for the need for that child and family and how they can fill a need for that family. So you're looking at, unfortunately, I hate to say this, you're looking at single caregivers who have a child inside of the home, because if I can fill a need for that caregiver, I can be the mentor to that child. Oh, I can pick them up from school. I can, take them to practice or do whatever it is. Now I'm grooming you and I'm gaining that sense of trust from you where I can begin to isolate. So what is the need inside of the family? They're looking to fulfill a need for the family.
How often does the child think that what's happening is okay and doesn't speak out?
More times than you would believe. That's actually a really great question, particularly in young children who've been victims of child sexual abuse. They don't understand that their sexual boundary has never been set for them, right? Oftentimes their first introductory to a sexual relationship, unfortunately, is through sexual abuse. And so they don't understand that what's happening to them is wrong. And the perpetrator oftentimes will tell them, this is what people who love each other do. This is our secret. Don't tell anybody about this. And it's not until we get them at ChildSafe and we get them into some kind of therapeutic environment that we're able to undo that damage to them.
So what do you think would surprise parents about the grooming process?
Upwards of 60 to 70% of those 93% that are known are going to be family members, unfortunately. I see a lot of guilt come from the non-offending caregiver because they left a child with an individual who is a family member, an uncle or a sibling or somebody who wind up perpetrating this abuse, and then there's an extreme amount of guilt. The problem is in that situation where we see a lot of that abuse happen is you have, again, a single caregiver, let's say it's a mom who has to go to work and they don't have anywhere else to place their child, so they wind up leaving them at a cousin's house or something like that, and then that's where the abuse happens. The other thing, you asked this question earlier that it would be shocking for caregivers to know, is the highest incidence, particularly of child sexual abuse, that happens with children is usually child on child. It's upwards to about 40 to 60%. The numbers vary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Child on child?
It's child to child sexual abuse, unfortunately. Yeah.
What ages are we talking about?
You're looking anywhere from 13 to 17 is usually what we see when it's child on child, the perpetration happening. It's usually happening against a younger child. Sometimes in those instances, those individuals who are perpetrating those crimes, the 13 to 17-year-old kids who are perpetrating those crimes, were victims of child abuse themselves. They never received the proper therapeutic intervention that they needed in order to reset that sexual boundary. Remember, I was telling you a little bit earlier, when child sexual abuse happens at young ages, that's usually the first exposure to it. So they don't necessarily understand that what they're doing is wrong, or it's a learned behavior, and so it's being passed on to the next generation. That's how it becomes intergenerational as well.
So it's a vicious cycle.
It's a horrible, vicious cycle. It's very similar to domestic violence, unfortunately.
If you could tell parents to watch one thing that would prevent child abuse, what would it be?
That's a great question. I think the big thing is just be aware of the people that you're placing your child with, and I think if you're trying to prevent it, it's not one thing to look out for. It's what conversations are you having with your child about protecting themselves? We don't want to present the world as an unsafe place to our children. We don't. We want them to feel safe at all times. When something horrific like this happens to them, I can't tell you the number of times I've had parents who just say, I don't even want my child in counseling because I just don't want them to talk about it. I want them to forget about it. Well, that's not going to help. Your fear of reporting should be much, much less than the pride you have in protecting a child.
In all the years you've done this work, what case has stayed with you the most?
Oh, there's been a number of cases in our community that has stayed with me. We had a child sexual abuse case where an infant was sexually assaulted with a serrated knife. We had an incident where 2 children were chained and locked up in the backyard while the caregivers left to go to Las Vegas on a trip, and they left them outside locked up. The Giovanni Ochoa case many moons ago, which started really the advocacy center here in Bexar County. He's the young child who died on Christmas Day and was starved to death by his grandparents. And so it's been a number of cases that have stuck with me, but nothing ceases to amaze me after 15 years of the cruelty that people can do to children now in our community.
Wow, it's hard even just listening to you say some of those things. Do you believe the child protection system that exists right now is doing enough to protect kids?
I think they're doing the best that they can do. It's a nuanced question that you're asking because, like I said, there's they put a lot of pressure on the department to be all things to these kids. Not only do they have to be caregivers in conservatorship to these children when they are removed, they have to investigate. They have to put forward evidence to ensure safety of that child, and they don't have to make the decision to remove a child. That's ultimately a judge's decision, but they do have to put forward that evidence to say this child should be removed from the home. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's left into the hands of young caseworkers coming out of college who lack the experience to make those calls. And so that's where you can see, I think, the system get tripped up sometimes.
So this is, you would say, the biggest gap in the system right now is a lack of training for caseworkers?
I would say the biggest gap in the system right now is just experience. It's not a job that you stay in for a very long time for all the reasons that we just talked about. You don't want to hear about these stories every single day. You carry the weight and the burden of protecting a child. You save 10 children, and then 1 out of the 10 winds up getting hurt, or you save hundreds of children, and 1 out of the hundreds of children that you saved wind up getting hurt, and you get the blame for everything. You get sued. You get threatened with lawsuits. Why would you stay in that job?
But then that sounds like as adults, we're failing our children. I mean, as a community, what can we do to change that?
I think that's the answer. I think the communities that we live in are failing our children. It's not the system's responsibility alone to protect children. It's our community's responsibility. And our community fails children every single day that we don't want to talk about this issue. I can't tell you the number of times I walk into a room and I have a conversation with people about what it is that I do for a living, and they don't want to talk about it.
Why is that? Is it because it scares people?
1 in 4 individuals are going to be victims of child sexual abuse in our community.
So shame? Somebody has gone through it and they don't feel like talking about it?
I think that's a big part of it. I think that's a big part of it. And the longer we choose not to have those conversations, or we choose not to speak out against it, then the longer we perpetuate the problem. We create a culture and environment that continues to foster abuse rather than having open dialogue and conversation about it, so children feel safe coming forward. So people who are perpetrating these crimes understand that we're not going to stand for this, and we're not going to take it, and we're going to prosecute it at its fullest extent. But when we don't want to talk about it, when we shame about it, or we shut down about it, what message does that send to the child who's currently being abused in our community? Don't talk about it. Keep your mouth shut, which is exactly what a perpetrator wants to happen.
I can understand a victim not wanting to speak because of the trauma they've endured, but I can't understand why the people around the victim would not want to say something.
I think a lot of it has to do for the exact question that you asked me earlier. Who's perpetrating these crimes? Oftentimes it's a family member. You don't want to see a family member go to jail. You don't want to cast blame on a family member. Sometimes it's the stepfather or the step-parent who's the breadwinner inside the home. It's a similar incidence as domestic violence, where you begin to rely on an individual financially. They begin to beat you down over time, cognitively, psychologically, to devalue you and your sense of self-worth, and you can't leave the situation any longer.
So are you saying that in a lot of cases, family members know about the abuse and they're keeping it quiet?
More times than not. You'd be surprised. It's something that's intergenerational, that's passed on from one person to another person to another person within a family, and it becomes normalized, unfortunately, inside a family.
Well, then they're just as complicit. And by
Absolutely.
law, they're just as complicit.
Absolutely. And oftentimes they're not held accountable for that complicity. So oftentimes your parental rights will be removed as well in that situation. So let's take an incidence of domestic violence inside of a home where a child is being privy to mom who's being consistently abused by the caregiver, the father. CPS can hold that mom accountable because oftentimes in that situation, an ashtray or something's thrown across the room and the ashtray hits the child. Well, the mom didn't leave that situation knowing that the child was at risk potentially of being harmed in that situation. They could be held accountable in that situation as well. You as a caregiver, if you know that you have a daughter inside the home and your husband or your spouse is sexually assaulting the child and you did nothing about it, you can be held accountable in that sense.
What happens to a child psychologically if they're abused and the abuse goes unreported?
A number of things begin to happen. Trauma has a heavy impact on children long term. The biggest thing that you begin to see with children is an increase in anxiety and disassociation from the world around them. And as a result of that, you wind up seeing them disassociate from their schoolwork. They wind up failing out of school. Long term, they may wind up, joining a gang because they don't feel connected to something or somebody. They're looking for some kind of connection. They touch the juvenile justice system. They're at a higher rate of touching the adult justice system, and then they become a byproduct of our systems. That's the worst case scenario. Oftentimes, what you'll see is individuals suffer in silence, and they wind up internalizing a lot of the anxiety and the stress and the trauma that they're going through.
A lot of other people have been abused and are still ashamed to talk about it.
They're ashamed, or they've never got their own treatment, or really never come to terms with what's happened to them, or it's perpetuating inside of their home currently. There's no breaking of that cycle. If 1 in 10 children are going to be confirmed victims of child abuse, there's another 9 children out there who aren't probably telling their abuse. And so if we're going to actually tackle this issue, the problem, I think, has to get worse before it gets better. We have to realize that the problem is much, much worse than what the statistics are telling us.
Does abuse happen in certain communities more than others?
No, it happens across every single community. You know, a long time ago, I was doing an interview on our Cardboard Kid campaign, and the thing that came out of that became kind of the elevator speech that was sticking is that child abuse is everywhere. It's you, it's me, it's our neighbors, it's all the people we know. 1 in 10 people are going to be confirmed victims of child abuse inside of our community. It's a lot of people, and they're not confined to one area inside of our community. They're all over the place. I go and I do a training education or speak out at an event about ChildSafe and child abuse inside of our community. There isn't one time, and I've heard this from numerous staff inside of our organization, where I walk off that stage and somebody hasn't walked up to me or come up and have a conversation with me to tell me their story as a child and how they were a victim of child abuse themselves. That's well-to-do families. That's people who are from lower socioeconomic families and from higher socioeconomic families. There's no boundary around this thing.
How do we get to our children to let them know that it's okay to speak up, don't be afraid? I would think the most common place is when they're at school, when they're with their friends, and they can support each other. Should there be courses that can be offered? Have you come across an option out there that you think could be helpful that just hasn't happened?
Caregivers have to do it. I think we as caregivers, I'm a parent of 3 children myself. We have to be willing to have those conversations with our children. We have to be willing to sit across from the table from them and talk to them about body safety and that they have control over their own bodies and that they can say no. It's a very personal conversation when you start to have conversations with young children about child sexual abuse in particularly. There's a wall there and there's a barrier there that has to come down with caregivers that say, hey, I trust this school administrator enough, I trust this teacher enough that they're going to be strong enough to have this conversation with my child.
What happens to a child after they walk through your doors at ChildSafe?
The beauty of children's advocacy centers across the state of Texas and at ChildSafe is that the idea and the concept of these things were formed out of creating a safe space and a safe environment for children to tell their stories of what happens to them. So the moment that they show up, they're greeted with what we call a family engagement specialist. This individual's job, their sole job, is not social work. It's not therapeutic. It's not anything but to ensure that that family feels comfortable in the space. And they're going to engage that child either through some form of coloring or play. If that child makes an outcry at ChildSafe, that opens up a wealth of other additional services to them, social work services to them, and therapeutic services inside of our organization.
I know you mentioned that a lot of the children are girls, but abuse happens to boys too.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why the majority of the population that we see at ChildSafe is female is because we are dealing with child sexual abuse. That's not to say that child sexual abuse doesn't happen with boys. It just happens at a higher rate against young girls. Child sexual abuse, 2 to 3 years is the average time before a child comes forward. There's usually no physical evidence to ascertain. So you're going based off of that child's story. That's where the Children's Advocacy Centers really come into play, because we can interview that child in that safe environment. They're going to be able to tell that story.
What age are children most vulnerable, would you say?
The majority of cases we get at ChildSafe are going to be female girls between the ages of 6 and 12, but the majority of cases we see at our organization are specifically child sexual abuse cases. When it comes to physical abuse cases, the most vulnerable age that we see are usually between the ages of 0 and 5, because that's where a lot of the frustration comes out, because the child can't verbalize what's going on with them. Caregivers get frustrated with them. They shake the child. They wind up with shaken baby syndrome or something of that nature.
I remember reporting on this like 15 years ago. There was a new program that was started in particular to help young parents. Are these resources still available, and where can people go?
There's some of those programs that are available out there inside of our community. I know at ChildSafe, one of the programs that we recently started is our community-based family advocacy program. It's designed to work with parents and caregivers who may be at risk of harming their child and try to intervene. What we'll do is we'll assess them to find out what their risk factors are for child abuse and what their protective factors are for child abuse. And we're going to work with that family to lower those risk factors and raise the protective factors before the abuse can actually happen inside that home. That could look like anything from educational attainment to getting assistance with keeping your lights on, to getting access to food if you have food scarcity, to getting medical help if you need medical help, to even possibly respite care. It's the whole reason why we invented the Cardboard Kids campaign. Cardboard Kids campaign was invented because we wanted to create a way in which caregivers like yourself, moms like yourselves, can have an art project to sit down and do with their children to start to have that conversation about what child abuse looks like and what it is. And you're doing it through an art project so that it's an easy way to engage your child.
The cardboard campaign we're talking about, this is what we're talking about, one of many.
And the idea, like I said, is to give them to caregivers like yourself, schools, teachers, youth programs, but to sit down and have an art project and really talk about what child abuse is.
What would you tell somebody right now who's suspecting child abuse?
They need to report it immediately. If it's an immediate situation where you know that a child is currently being sexually abused, they need to call local law enforcement.
For a child who's watching this right now who may be suffering abuse or has been abused, what would you want them to hear today?
There's help. There's help. You don't have to go through that abuse. There's a lot of people who are in the same situation that you're in right now who've made an outcry and who've been believed, and they will be believed, and that they've been put on a path to recovery and justice and healing, and that I would hope that that happens for them. That please be brave. Please find somebody you trust, somebody you know that you feel comfortable with talking to, and let them know what's going on in your life.